The following is a special presentation of the Wiregrass Black History Channel.
In 1979, a group of young community leaders in Dothan wanted to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with a TV program. It was the first of its kind in Dothan, Alabama. An article in the Dothan Eagle newspaper describes the program. A salute to Dr. King will be presented at 6 p.m. Monday, January 15th by Channel 18 WDHN. The tribute to Martin Luther King Jr. is sponsored by participants in the public interest. PPI has planned a discussion of the life of Dr. King, including film clips and recorded portion of some of his speeches. David Kirkland is the show host. Panel guests include Stanley Davis, Eliza Reynolds, Deborah Smith, and James L. Thompson Jr. PPI members said Dr. King's birthday has been declared a national holiday. Now let's go back to 1979 and the special TV program, We Remember Dr. King.
Negro masses all over began to re-evaluate themselves. The Negro came to feel that he was somebody. His religion revealed to him. His religion revealed to him that God loves all of his children, and that all men are made in his image, and that figuratively speaking, every man, from a bass black to a treble white, is significant on God's people. Good evening, and welcome to We Remember Dr. King. I am David Kirkland, your host. This program will venture into the reasons, the struggle, the goals, the psychology that led to the death of Dr. King. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, born January 15, 1929, died April 4th, 1968. Dr. King was a man loved, hated, stepped on, beaten, received, denied. Yes, we remember Dr. King on his birthday. But there are others who remember Dr. King, maybe not in the way that you or I remember him. And I would like to introduce those to you. Seated next to me is Stanley Davis, a juvenile probation officer with Houston County. Seated next to Mr. Davis is Deborah Smith, a graduate student at Howard University. Seated next to Ms. Smith is Eliza Reynolds, a member of PPI. Seated next to Mr. Reynolds is Mr. James Thompson Jr., the president of PPI and a youth counselor with the Department of Youth Services. Mr. Davis, what do you remember most about Dr. King?
Well, Mr. Kirkland, I remember the fact that Dr. Martin Luther King was a brilliant strategist and a coordinator of human efforts. I think when you go back to what he did, you must remember that this did not really begin with Dr. Martin Luther King, but actually began during slavery, when we were concerned at that time with civil rights. During the 30s, Adam Clayton Powell in Harlem, he first began to make nonviolent noises, also in Cleveland, Chicago, and in Los Angeles. But there was one element missing. This was not done on a national scale, and the element missing was the church, which is indeed the backbone of the black community. But Dr. Martin Luther King realized this, and he brought the church into play with his unification of the black community. It was his idea to take the struggle for civil rights out of the courtroom and into the streets, to take it out of the law libraries, into the pews of the church, to take the struggle from the minds of men to the souls of men. He also had a four-pronged attack that he was going to use in achieving this. They were direct nonviolent action, legal redress, the use of the ballot, and economic boycotts. Direct nonviolent action by means of marches and protests, legal redress, and that he wanted the people to stay out of the courtroom. He wanted to stay away from legal squabbles and battles. Use of the ballot. This has been one of the most extensive tools that the black community has used. And finally, by the use of economic boycotts. By taking a group of people, boycotting a business, making the sales decline, this was aimed at getting attention. But by the unification of the church, Dr. Martin Luther King reached the millions of black people who otherwise probably would not have participated in this movement. He coordinated ministers and he coordinated teachers, the poor people, the middle class, even the upper class blacks. This movement was not directed at one single aspect of the black community, but at the black community as a whole toward achieving civil rights in America. And I think this is mostly what I remember about Dr. Martin Luther King, the fact that he was such a brilliant strategist and a coordinator of human efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Okay, Ms. Smith, what do you remember about Dr. King?
Mr. Kirkland, I remember Dr. King as a very great leader of the Black Revolution. This Black Revolution began in 1955, and it was initiated by a very great woman whose name was Mrs. Rosa Parks. This revolution was not intended to start when Mrs. Parks made the move she did on December the 1st, 1955. Mrs. Parks was simply tired. She had grown weary from a long day's work, and she simply wanted rest and relaxation on the bus. When she refused to give her seat up to that of a white male passenger, she marked a very great turning point in that of the black community. Mrs. Parks' action was the beginning of implementation of the Black Revolution. If the revolution was to come, it was extremely unlikely that it was going to be by the way of a gentle lady, as Mrs. Parks was. Mrs. Parks was consumed at this moment not by history, but by the tedium of survival in the Jim Crow South. The situation of sit-ins, the freedom rides, the Birmingham riots, the clinch fist, the afro, the black power, the Robs and Watts, the shooting down of Medgar Evers, the assassination of Martin Luther King himself, the smoke of burning buildings, the sound of gunfire within blocks from the White House. All of these things were wrapped up in an embryo, so to speak, when Mrs. Parks decided to make this move. They were there waiting to be evolved when she decided not to give her seat over to that of the male passenger. These things were all there waiting to be evolved and to be a part of the Black Revolution. After this took place, the black ministers in Montgomery got together and formed an alliance in order to start this revolution. The black ministers were very well tied together because of the religious aspect of the black community. This was one holding force that existed within the community, and this is what really helped the unity of the black people together. On December the 5th, 1955, a boycott was initiated from the planning of these black ministers. This boycott was very successful. It had been estimated that at least 60 to 70% would consent to the boycott, but amazingly, at least 90% consented to it, and it was very effective. After boycotting the buses in Montgomery over a year, in 1956, December 21st, the Supreme Court ruled that it was indeed unconstitutional for segregation to exist in the Montgomery system. This is what I remember most about Dr. King.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. We have discussed the unification through the Church of Dr. King and the beginning of the Black Revolution. After these messages, we'll have more, and you'll listen to Dr. King's dream.
time's up.
On August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King was bringing the March on Washington to a climatic close. More than 200,000 were there. Millions listened and watched on television and radio. He said, "I have a dream," thundering out the distance between the American dream and the reality of being black. Let's reminisce and listen to the famous words of Dr. King, "I have a dream."
Still have a dream.
Yes.
It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. A dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. Dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall see it together. This is our hope, and this is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Heard famous words from the famous speech of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream. We shall now continue to discuss things that we remember about Dr. King. Mr. Elijah Reynolds, what do you remember most about Dr. King?
Well, in the late 1960s, many blacks became aware not only of the racial injustice, but also of the economic injustice of our American system. This condition brought into existence many groups which had a more radical approach than that of Dr. Martin Luther King. These groups, some of them were the Revolutionary Action Movement and the Black Panthers Party. Their approach was in direct opposition to Dr. Martin Luther King's approach. And because of their approach, many lives were lost. Many people suffered destruction of homes, many buildings were burned, and a total destruction was caused because of these groups. Dr. King felt also the economic pressure of the black community, and it was because of this that he went to Memphis, Tennessee. And there he was to lead a march for the sanitation workers who were on strike for a minimum wage increase. But the mayor of Memphis, Tennessee, Mayor Henry Loeb, refused to even sit down and talk with these workers. Instead, he decided to call in the National Guard when a few of the blacks became a little unrowdy. King was also criticized during this time by many blacks as well as whites who felt that he was doing the blacks an injustice by staying in a white motel. King then left Memphis and went to Atlanta. On his return, he decided to stay at the Lorraine Hotel, which was a hotel owned by a black man. It was here at this hotel that he was killed. This is what I remember most about Dr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Thompson, what do you remember most about Dr. King?
Well, mainly, I remember the death of Dr. King, if anything. In April of 1968, I was only about 13 years old in the 8th grade, but I do remember the crying in the schoolrooms among both the teachers and the students during the death of Dr. King. I also remember the fact that Dr. King was called a black messiah. At that time in the 8th grade, I didn't really understand what the term messiah meant, so I went to the dictionary and looked up the term messiah. It was only coincidental that the term messiah meant king or leader, and it was a coincidence that Dr. King's name was King. So Dr. King was called the Black Messiah. I do believe that Dr. King was the most celebrated man that professed nationwide nonviolence that was produced in 20th century America. The death of Dr. King, to me, seemed to have given a new and vigorous strength to the blacks nationwide on a wide scale by the fact that they were now wanting to advance like they had never advanced before. They want to advance for equal rights and as far as equal opportunities. There seemed to be a heavy influx of black businesses all across the nation after the death of Dr. King. It might be for the fact that blacks were no longer afraid to try to advance in the new world or the so-called white world. even today it is self-evident that Dr. King's death and life is still significant to a lot of people because his birthday has been proclaimed a national holiday. If anything, Mr. Kirkland, I would say that the death of Dr. King gave blacks a chance all over the world to say also that we too have a dream, and we would like to see our dream come true by living for freedom. I think also the death of Dr. King gave us a new strength in the South as far as trying to educate our young to be more like Dr. King, or more like men as educated as Dr. King, and the fact that Dr. King had a brilliant talent of combining intelligence and courage to speak out for what he felt was right in a nonviolent manner. A lot of people tried to downplay and down-talk Dr. King, but I feel that what Dr. King did set a traditional language and standard for all of our future black leaders to follow. Today we have several black leaders such as Reverend Jesse Jackson who are speaking in sort of a like manner as that of Dr. King, which Dr. King set in the early 1960s. So mainly I would have to say that the death of Dr. King is more reminiscent for me, although at that time I was at an early age of 13 or 14. But the death of Dr. King to me is still very significant today in the fact that we are celebrating his birthday on this show as a national holiday. And that is what I remember most about Dr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We will continue our discussion on what we remember most about Dr. King after these messages. Our discussion on Dr. King, this being his birthday, and he died on the 4th day of April 1968, and it's been over 10 years, going on 11 years. And Mr. Davis, what about Dr. King's character impressed you the most?
Well, I'd have to say that it was the strength of his character. What really impresses me about Dr. King was the fact that he could turn the other cheek when he was hit. There are not too many people that can do that. It is very typical for us to react to violence with violence. But his entire movement was based on a passive resistance kind of movement. Dr. King was morally strong, physically strong, and he had the capacity and the intelligence to realize that for him to throw one blow would have defeated his entire movement. And throughout his entire existence, Dr. King never once struck anyone. He was beaten, he was kicked, he was maimed, he was stabbed. And throughout all of this, because of the strength of his character, he was able to turn the other cheek and forgive his enemies. And this is within the teachings of Christ. And I think this is what kept the solidarity within the movement.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Ms. Smith, would you briefly name some modern-day example that you feel stem from the works of Dr. King?
For Mr. Kirkland, I think that all of us can look around and see that a lot of the results of Dr. King's works are still in existence, and they will be eternally, I hope. But I can see in the schoolrooms, I can see as far as housing and medical care, as far as the income, the employment of blacks, all of this has improved since the Black Revolution that Dr. King led. We have had substantial progress since the late 50s or early 60s, and I feel that if Dr. King could come back, if there was any way he could come back, he would be happy to know that we have made progress. On the other hand, I feel at the same time that he might be a little disappointed that we have not moved at a faster rate than we have. I feel that Dr. King opened up doors for the black community. We are still, I feel, at the threshold of the door of opportunity. We are by no means over the hump yet, so to speak. Dr. King would like to come back and see that we are in complete economic parity with those of our counterparts. He would like to see that the unemployment rate would be lowered. He would like to see that the income there would be no differential gap in the income. And I feel that these are some of the results of his works.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. I would like to thank our guest today, Mr. Stanley Davis of the Houston County Juvenile Probation Department, Ms. Deborah Smith, a student at Howard University, Mr. Elijah Reynolds, who is a member of PPI, the Participants in the Public Interest, Mr. James Thompson, Jr., who is also a member of the Participants in the Public Interest. He's the president and also youth counselor with the Department of Youth Services. And we hope you have enjoyed our show, and we hope that we have enlightened you on some of the things about Dr. King. Thanks for watching. Do you remember Dr. King?
Time brings on a change. Time brings on a change.